Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us on what is a beautiful sunny morning. We're going to get cracking because we've got quite a lot of things to cover in a shortish space of time. I'd like you to be welcome to me and to Amy. For those of you who don't know us, my name is Emma Swan, and I'm the head of the commercial employment team at Forbes Solicitors. And Amy was promoted on Friday, and she is one of our she is the senior associate in our employment team. So very quickly, what we are and aren't going to cover this morning, we are going to be covering some of the things that we believe you need to start thinking about for your people and business planning as lockdown starts to be released. What we're not going to cover in any real detail is furlough leave. So we're not going to be talking about the entitlement, some of the nuances of how it operates, but what we will talk about is what we anticipate will happen as that starts to come to an end, and possibly different changes with that. We're not going to do live Q&As. We've got 100 people booked to dip in and out of this session as we're going forward over for the next 45 minutes. But what we would encourage you to do is to use the chat function to send us questions, and we do have time at the end for questions that Amy and I will answer. So I'm going to hand over now to Amy, who is going to make a start for us.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well. I'm just going to start by talking a little bit about what will happen when furlough ends. So currently, the furlough scheme, and that's the government's job retention scheme, is due to end on the 30th of June 2020. I think most of you will know that. That was extended by, from the end of May. So the furlough scheme's looking like it's going to come to an end after the lockdown it starts to be lifted, which we anticipate some plans on in the next week or so. Emma's going to talk a little bit about what you might want to think about when lockdown ends after this. So in terms of the job retention scheme, it does seem to have staved off quite a large number of job cuts. And I think some of you may have heard some of the statistics that have come out recently from the Office of National Statistics that show that 2/3 of employers have actually furloughed workers now. And they are anticipating that around a quarter of the workforce are currently furloughed from employment. And it seems to have been the most popular of all the financial aid programs that the government have put together. The cost the cost of this is significant. The current estimates are that it's cost £8 billion, and they're estimating over the 3-month period that the total cost will be 40 billion, which is significant. And to put that into context, that's the same amount of the entire education budget for 2020. So, you know, a significant amount. We're not entirely sure how the furlough scheme is going to come to an end, whether they're going to wind it down more gradually. And I know that there has been a significant amount of calls from within business sectors for it to be wound down more gradually rather than coming to a complete long stop end. And if they do that, then there may well be a time frame where there is where you're able to furlough for part of the time and then use some kind of short time working. But we don't know at the current time what that's going to look like, but it would fit in quite well with the gradual reopening of the economy. So what we're saying to clients is maybe think about, if they do bring it to a complete end at the end of June, which seems to be the intention at the moment, how you would actually manage that in the run up to it. Are you going to look at potentially lifting some people from furlough earlier and planning for that, how that might look? Whether you can look at whether you could put people on short time working before that. But we'll discuss that in more detail as we go through this session this morning. The government have confirmed that the organisations should keep the records of furlough for 5 years, and the reason for that, we believe, is that HMRC are going to audit these very, very carefully and ensure that you have the correct documentation in place, confirming that you have you've effectively changed the employee's status to being a furloughed worker. You'll need evidence of that, but also in addition to that, that you have the employee's agreement and that you have paid them appropriately, and that you've calculated the payment appropriately. So you need to be prepared for that, and this is something that we're advising businesses to do, to make sure that you have all of your justification as to the reasons why you furloughed people, and then the documentation confirming that they have been furloughed, and the figures, the calculations for the figures, that they're all readily available. So as and when HMRC do audit, you're ready for that. And that's something that we are that we're assisting our clients with at the moment. We're offering a fixed price audits that we will look at and help you get ready for those HMRC audits. You also need to think about how you're going to end furlough. There's at the current time in the guidance, there's no guidance at all about how you might do that. So our understanding would be that you would simply just write to the employees, just contact them and say that we are ending furlough on this particular date. And you might want to give them some notice so that they can mentally prepare to return to work after being out of the workplace for some period of time. But there is no minimum requirement on you to give notice in that way. So passing back to Emma about when lockdown is lifted.
Thank you, Amy. So we can see across the world that lockdown is starting to be lifted. Different countries are taking different approaches to how businesses and schools are reopening, the different expectations on individuals. So we can glean some information as to what may be influencing our government. It is very clear that at some point businesses are going to have to reopen, and the economy cannot stay as it is. People cannot be kept in their homes indefinitely. So we know that at some point things are going to start getting back to a little bit like the normal that we used to know. We also are hoping that the government this week will release the guidance that is apparently being drafted, and some larger businesses have seen drafts of that. I don't think today there's much point in going into the draft in too much, if any detail at all, because as we have seen with the furlough leave, things can change very quickly. And I anticipate between now and when the government do start making official announcements, that draft will change to quite a considerable degree. But what we can do at the moment, and as Amy said, what we're encouraging businesses to do, is to start thinking about what life after lockdown is going to look like. And it gives businesses a really good opportunity to sit back and take a really hard, clear look at what your business is about. What worked well before we went into lockdown? What have you done during lockdown that has worked well, or what hasn't worked well, and what you might be able to do going forward? So if we move on to the next slide, what we do need to plan for is what's likely to be a staged return to the workplace. And we anticipate that that is going to be over a prolonged period of time. And the guiding principle that we really urge everyone to take, and this is coming from many different factions, from business factions, but also from the trade unions, is that you take care of your people, and that you're safeguarding their health and their well-being. And that really is the driving force behind what you are planning going forwards. Now, how you manage a return to the workplace is going to depend on the type of closure arrangements you have been operating. So there are three main types that we have been seeing. There are some where businesses haven't been trading at all and staff have been furloughed, and we've principally seen that in the leisure and hospitality sector. We have some businesses that are trading on a limited basis, where some staff are furloughed, some are working from home or in the company premises, or where only essential workers are currently in work. And we're seeing that more on the basis of office workers, where on the whole people can still manage to work at some degree. Or we've got businesses trading fully, but all staff are working from home. Now, there are some businesses who have very happily been managing to continue operating. We work with a number of food manufacturers who have been able to continue working. Obviously, supermarkets have also. But if we focus on those three that have been massively affected by this to some degree or another. Now, whichever is closest to your individual business, there are going to be some common issues that you need to address. And in looking forward, you need to be building these into your plans. Now, it seems highly likely that there will be a requirement for some form of social distancing for some time to come. And the speculation at the moment is that that will be kept in place until a vaccine is found. And a vaccine could well only be found next year, possibly even the year later. Lockdown restrictions will likely be lifted incrementally, and all staff who can work from home are going to be expected carrying on doing so. Where certain groups of employees or businesses are part of a sectorial return to the workplace, you do need to start considering detailed risk management approaches to safeguard your health and minimise the risk of infection. It is essential, therefore, that you continue to base any plans for returning to the workplace on what the government is saying, but also on the public health guidance. The Health and Safety Executive has been publishing advice and guidance related to COVID-19, and you might find that that's useful to look at as you're starting to plan for return to the workplace. Given that the priority for every business should be managing a safe return to workplace for staff, it's crucial that you work in close collaboration with your health and safety and occupational health teams wherever possible. You must communicate the practical measures you are taking to staff on a regular basis, and this is going to really help them feel reassured about their health and well-being, and that safety is your top priority for them. Make sure that employees are clear about what procedures they should follow if they begin to feel unwell, both in the workplace when they start returning and also at home. You are going to need to think carefully about reviewing your workplace from the operational perspective. Can staff actually maintain the 2 meters physical distance from each other that we are being encouraged to take? How are you going to manage meetings and interviews or other interactions? What do you think about communal areas if you have them, such as canteens or kitchen areas? How can you implement resourcing strategies to support that physical distancing that we are going to need to continue with? Are you going to be able to look at staggering working hours so that staff who do need to be in the office or in the workplace can be, but aren't all coming in to the workplace and in close proximity at the same time? All of the key protection and hygiene measures are going to be continuing to apply to minimise the spread of infection. So you need to still be reminding your staff about regular and effective hand washing and providing hand sanitisers for them. If your premises have been closed for a period of time, you need to think about carrying out a deep clean before you reopen, and you should be thinking carefully about reviewing your cleaning arrangements. For example, ensuring that phones, keyboards, etc. are going to be wiped daily with antiviral cleaner. One thing that has been mooted this week, and there's been a lot of speculation, which I think will massively impact on our team, is the use of hot desking. Only just before Christmas, the employment team at Forbes came together for the first time in one building, but we've encouraged agile working and hot desking. At the moment, from that health and safety perspective, from infection control, we're going to have to look at whether we continue with hot desking or how we can do that safely. And I'm sure that there are many other offices that will be in a similar situation. Depending on your working environment, your plans also need to consider whether you need to provide additional PPE, maybe gloves, masks, or antiviral hand gel. If you're wanting people to be wearing gloves and masks, make sure that you think about how you're going to train them or brief them on using that PPE. Because as we've all seen on the news, if you are putting these things on in the incorrect way, then they are not going to be effective. You also need to be thinking about staff who are travelling or visiting other company premises. They may also need additional equipment or briefing. If you haven't already started using remote meeting facilities and video conferencing, and I can see that by the number of you who are joining us today, that you're certainly seeing a lot of you are actually using these technologies, can we be using them in the business rather than encouraging staff to go back to the old norm of visiting other sites? Can we minimise the need for staff to travel or use public transport wherever possible? You also need to be thinking about the fact that this pandemic hasn't just been a physical impact, it's also had a huge psychological impact on your workforce. There will be many who are anxious about returning. They will be anxious about the ongoing risk to their health and to their loved ones' health. And we need to be mindful of that. And that's where communication to them about the safeguarding measures you're putting in place will be absolutely critical to encouraging them to come back to work where you are wanting them to. You may also have to be prepared for those who've had really challenging times, those people who have been at home, who have been trying to juggle childcare with their working life. Their experience of lockdown has been very different to others who have had no commitments to childcare and have just been able to log in and work as normal through the day, log off and enjoy the sunshine that we've been seeing. There will also be many people who are returning to the workplace who've either lost people, who have been ill themselves, or still have people who are ill in hospital. And we need to be very mindful of the impact that that has all had on them. Now, one thing that some of you will remember me saying before the lockdown at a CIPD presentation that I did, which seems many months ago, never mind the mere few weeks that it was, that I said that the coronavirus is going to give us an opportunity to really think about how we work. And it is likely, I said, that this will change the way we work forever. And one of the things that I quoted, and I think it's timely to re-quote it, is that the increase in home working with technology that we have seen being enabled during the coronavirus lockdown has been absolutely critical to the success of the businesses during lockdown. But it is also giving us the opportunity to see that technology does work for us whilst we're trying to run businesses remotely. For many years, companies such as Apple and Box and Twitter and Facebook have been encouraging staff to work from home. And I don't know whether any of your businesses have been monitoring it. And if you haven't, this is again something to look at in your planning as to how working from home has been affecting your business. Prior to coronavirus, some data was collated by an organisation called FlexiJobs, and they reported that where people were working from home, there was an 85% increase on productivity for businesses. There was a 90% improvement in morale for employees because of the flexibility. And there was 77% lower operating costs for businesses. So it's really important that you look very carefully at what has been working and how it's been working, what it has saved you, or what it has improved in your business going forwards. Now, I'm going to pass you over to Amy to talk about the options of restructuring and looking at redundancies that some of you businesses are unfortunately going to be facing. Thank you.
So in terms of considerations, let me just get the slide on. There we go. One of the things that you might want to think about to kind of implement some of the things that Emma has just discussed now is whether or not your contracts of employment are actually fit for purpose. One of the things that organisations will be looking at is obviously for a more flexible workforce going forward, particularly if you are going to reintegrate staff back into work in a more phased manner. So you need to ensure that your contractual terms reflect the reality of the situation. And so in preparation for the lifting of lockdown and for furlough coming to an end, what a lot of employers are doing is checking those contracts and looking at amending them. Obviously, if it's a change to an employment contract, contractual terms, you can't just simply reissue a new contract. If it's a significant change to the contract, you would have to look at some kind of consultation and ideally amending the contracts by agreement. But some of the things that you might want to look at putting in your contract, if you don't already have them in there, is the right to lay off and short time work. Because if there is a drop in work going forward after furlough comes to an end, and there is no, I mean, the furlough scheme, the job retention scheme, as I outlined earlier, the costs are so significant. If there is another lockdown, is there going to be the potential for another similar scheme? So you need to have in place alternative options. And when we were speaking to clients who were initially, before they announced the job retention scheme, people were saying we want to temporarily lay employees off for a period of time so that we can they will remain employed, but they'll just get the statutory guarantee pay, which is significantly less, but it gives the organisation a bit of breathing space. Or alternatively, putting the staff on short time working, but you can only do that if you've got the contractual right to do so. So any employer that doesn't have the ability to lay off or place employees on short-time work in their contract, we are advising them now to include that in the contracts. The other things that you might want to look at is more flexibility on the place of work as well, because there'll be some people who are working from home at the moment, but their contracts clearly state that their place of work is elsewhere. So you might want to amend the contract to reflect that if you need more flexibility in that way, because what you don't want is to be in a situation where somebody essentially refuses to work from home, when actually it would be better in the circumstances for them to do that. The other key point is having some more flexibility to amend the hours that the employees work, rather than have, potentially reducing minimum hours or something like that. And a lot of clients that I've spoken to have unfortunately had to look at a reduced working week as well, to ensure the survival of the business. And that's something that, if you are wanting to implement that, you will need to consult with your staff and change your contracts accordingly. But what a lot of organisations are doing is saying that they're going to do that through a temporary variation with a review period built in. So because by far and away the purpose of consultation is to reach the agreement of the employees, and if you reach that agreement, you can make that amendment straight away. So one of the things that you would do is you get out communication explaining why you're in this situation, and asking the employees to agree to a potential reduction in the working week, and then amend the contracts with a review period built in. Another consideration is your policies and procedures, making sure that they actually reflect the new working practices. There's been so many, obviously everyone's pretty much majority of the workforce are now working from home, potentially using their own devices. Have you updated your information and security policy on that basis? Do you have a bring your own device to work or use your own device at work policy? And a lot of organisations are still playing catch up with that. And this is something that you should use the time now, particularly where you've got furloughed staff that will potentially be working from home or working more flexibly going forward. You'll want to look at your policies and procedures on that basis. And most organisations, if they don't already, will have a specific policy on COVID-19, such as Emma mentioned, with the steps that you're going to take to protect the workforce. Things like social distancing, making it very clear what the rules are and ensuring that that is in your policies and procedures. And in respect of that as well, you might want to look at different types of policies that might support as well. If you are going to have a specific COVID-19 policy with social distancing rules and requirements in there, then you will need to look at your disciplinary policy as well. Because think about what if an employee doesn't actually comply with that policy? How is that going to be dealt with? And you would potentially want it to be a disciplinary sanction to ensure that the policy is properly implemented. So just ensure that the process is clear on that point, and it's well communicated, and that the sanctions are proportionate and consistent as well. And you may, as part of your policy, you may want to look at how, if people have concerns about other people breaching the social distancing policies or the COVID policy, how they report that. So you might want to include something in the grievance process as well. So I mentioned about communication and consultation with staff. Unfortunately, we now need to discuss the kind of unavoidable but quite negative side of things, which is what your business is going to look like going forward, and how you're going to, whether you need to restructure the roles that you have currently. Obviously, you'll be looking at potentially people working more flexibly, but do you actually need all of the roles? And if you don't, then one of the things that you might want to explore is whether there is a requirement for redundancy. And if you are going through that process, then you'll need to ensure that you follow a fair and proper procedure, and that you select appropriately. So you'll need to think about the selection criteria, think about your business justification as to who you need and why, pool properly, and then pull together some kind of objective as possible selection criteria. Think about consultation, but be aware of the minimum consultation periods as well. So if you are looking at terminating the employment of 20 or more employees in a 90-day period, then there is the requirement to consult for a minimum of 30 days. And if there is over 100 that you're looking at employment terminating, then you are looking at a 45-day minimum consultation period. In addition to that, you will also have to inform the redundancy payments office that you are intending to make those redundancies, and you have to elect employee representatives or consult with recognised trade union representatives as well. What often catches employers out is people think, oh, that's 20 or more redundancy dismissals. It's not. So if you have employees with less than 2 years service who you let go during this time because they can't bring an unfair dismissal claim, and you don't think that you need them any further, they will count towards that 20. And so it's over a 90-day period. So if you've already dismissed some people with notice who hadn't been with you for very long, and then you're looking at a redundancy process, then think about how that they will actually add to your figures. So don't get caught out with this, because if you fail to consult, then there are quite significant awards that the businesses, that employees can go to tribunal and secure on that basis. You also need to consider alternatives. So what a lot of organisations that I've been speaking to are doing is they're consulting with their staff to reach agreement to reduction in working weeks to start off with. But if they can't reach that agreement, then they will be placing people at risk of redundancy. And then as part of that redundancy process, looking at offering an alternative, which is the reduced working week. And then if they accept that, then great. And if they don't, then they'll be going through the redundancy process accordingly. In terms of other alternatives, if there are alternative roles and things like that, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, because we are going to be running a specific event. Well, I'm going to be running a specific event on restructuring redundancy and varying contracts, and how you would go about that, the consultation process, on the 26th of May. We'll send out details afterwards about that. But if you are in that situation, that will be a much more in-depth event, that webinar that I'll run on that, so we can talk through it then. So back to Emma.
Thank you, Amy. Right, so we've encouraged you to be thinking about what you did well as a business before lockdown. What have you done during lockdown? What's worked well? What hasn't? Amy's talked through looking at some of those efficiencies through people. Are you going to need to restructure how you operate? Are you going to need to make redundancies or encourage people to reduce their hours or their working practices? So hopefully you've now started thinking a little bit more about how to go forward and put a plan in place, bearing in mind that the health and safety and well-being of our staff are absolutely critical. And the communication is key to ensuring that everybody feels safe and feels confident that as employers we are supporting them and protecting them. So the last thing that I want to leave you with in terms of your plans and your thought process is how you actually reintegrate your employees, whether that is in a gradual way of bringing them back to the workplace, whether that's if you decide to continue with home working and agile working in a way that you hadn't promoted prior to lockdown. Now, what is going to be vital is that you have some form of reorientation or reinduction process for returning staff. It's really important to encourage and support your managers to have one-to-one return meetings with their employees, where you are focusing or encouraging managers to focus on the health and safety and well-being of those individuals. Now, managers are going to perhaps need a little bit of training or a little bit of a prompt as to what they should be covering, but they need to be thinking about being sensitive and having open discussions with individuals as to what has lockdown been like for them, how do they feel about coming back to work, what support as a business should we be thinking about providing to them. It may also be that some people need adjustments because of illnesses that they've had during lockdown, particularly if they have been very poorly with COVID-19, and whilst they have recovered, they are still experiencing physical issues with that. Really important. It's also important to be thinking about your furloughed employees who are coming back, and whether there are any changes that you've put in place in the business whilst they've not been working that they need to be informed about or being trained about. Now, it's likely that there are going to be significant changes because of the social distancing to some of your health and safety requirements and policies. And it's very important that you ensure that everybody is aware of them, is trained on things if they need specific training, and that they also understand that if they aren't following those, that is potentially disciplinary action that could follow. But it's really important to continue to be clear, as you would have normally, on what your policies and procedures are. Finally, it's going to be really important for you all to ensure that the organisation culture is going to be inclusive. Every employee is going to be looking more for a supportive and caring environment. And what we have to bear in mind is that this pandemic has had an unequal effect on people. There will be different groups of employees in your business who've been affected completely differently. Some will have been very resilient, will have coped really well, will be looking forward to coming back to work and just getting on with the job. There will be an enormous number who have been affected in ways that they themselves didn't imagine they could have been. There will be some who have been furloughed, who may have felt isolated because they weren't in contact with their colleagues, may feel as though they've lost a sense of purpose, even though they were being paid 80%, and may have been economically coping okay with that. They may have lost out from not being at work. There will also be employees who resent the fact that they have been in work, still being paid 100%, but knowing that they could have taken that 20% hit on their salary and would have preferred to have been at home doing nothing during this period. So it's really important to try and encourage your managers to have those one-to-ones sooner rather than later, and be aware that different people will have different expectations going forward. Now, we have come to the end of our session. We have got about just under 10 minutes left to take some questions. So if anybody would like to now send them through to the chat, we have had a couple of people bob us the odd email rather than a chat, so we can take people through there. But I'll just give you all just a moment to have a quick look at that chat function. On my screen, there's a chat box right at the bottom that you just click on. Some of you, if you've changed your navigation, it might be down the side, but it's just like a text message symbol that just says chat underneath. I'm explaining it carefully because someone had to explain it carefully to me because I'm a bit of a technophobe. So I understand that there might be the odd person out there who isn't too sure either. I'm also going to give my emails just a really quick check again, just to make sure that there's no questions in there.
So we've had a question which is about GDPR, and the question is, Does GDPR come into play in the event that we wish to take and possibly record employees' temperatures? We may implement a daily check for any on-site employees. Should we record them or should we destroy them immediately after taking? And that's an interesting question in respect of that, because data, my understanding, and I have to caveat this by I am not a data protection expert, but my understanding is that there's certain special category data and things like medical information will fall within that. An employee's temperature, I'm not sure whether that would fall into special category data, but you would have to have a particular reason for processing it. My view would be to check the employees' temperatures, but not actually to record them. So if you are taking a temperature, to check it, but not actually store that anywhere. So if you're using one of these non-contact temperature gauges, if you don't actually store it and you don't record it next to the employee's name, then you're not processing the data, so you don't need a particular reason to do it. If you are going to take people's temperatures, which I know a lot of organisations, particularly in the manufacturing sector, are already doing, then you need to ensure that that's covered in your policy, in your COVID-19 policy, from a health and safety perspective as well. And you need to ensure it's very important that the people that are taking the temperatures in the morning are properly safeguarded as well, that they have appropriate PPE, because they're the ones that are going to be coming into contact with the employees as they attend in the morning. So hopefully that helps with that question. Do you want to take the next one, Emma?
Okay, so I'll now cover a couple of the questions as well. Just picking up, we've got a question about whether you should be publishing a post-COVID-19 health and safety policy. I don't think you need to publish a brand new all singing, all dancing health and safety policy, but what I do think that you need to do is to visit your health and safety policy that you currently have, and possibly then provide an annex to it, because it's unlikely that it's going to cover all eventualities, so that you have a standalone specific COVID-19 recommendations. And it may have to vary depending on whether you've got people coming into the office, working from home, or whether they actually work in clients' premises. So you do need to start thinking about having something in writing to annex to your existing policies. I'm then just going to pick up a question about how we respond to those who don't want to return to the office as they're feeling vulnerable but aren't technically shielding. The answer to that is a little bit similar to one of the answer to one of the questions that's a little bit further below, about how do we deal with people who are refusing to either have the temperature taken or refusing to wear a mask, etc. And the response is this: first of all, talk to them, find out why they do not feel comfortable coming into work, or why they are refusing to wear certain PPE that is being recommended. If you've communicated carefully as to the policies that you're implementing in terms of bringing people back into the workplace, or asking people to wear PPE, then that should go a good way in alleviating some of those fears. If you've issued that communication, when you're talking to the employees, make sure you check that they've actually read it and understand where you are coming from. If you are following the proper health and safety advice that the HSE have been issuing, if you're following government advice and you're communicating with staff, then provided you handle it sensitively and you are exploring the issues with the individuals who are refusing to come back in, and there is really no reasonable justification for them refusing to come in, then you can look to go down a disciplinary route. But before you do that, make sure you have explored with them why they're uncomfortable doing that. Is there something that you can do to accommodate them in the short term? If they've successfully been working from home for the past few weeks, then can you let that continue for those people who are feeling a little bit anxious, if you are satisfied that they are still being productive at home? In terms of those people who are refusing to wear the PPE, again, explore with them why it is that they don't want to wear it, why they aren't following the instructions. make sure that they are aware of the communications and any new policies that you've implemented or annex policies that you have issued for health and safety and PPE. And again, after dealing with it in that more sensitive way, if they are still refusing to, and you have warned them that it could lead to disciplinary action, then you can start going down that route to going through a disciplinary process and issuing a warning for them. Okay, I'm just going to hand back to Amy.
So one of the other questions that we've had is about annual leave, and it says, am I right in thinking that unless you're a key worker, you still have to take all your annual leave this year? So it makes no difference that you can't travel or have nothing to do. You still need to use or lose your 20 days. So I think a lot of you will have heard that the guidance has stated that if you are unable to take your annual leave in the current leave year, and because of COVID-19, you can carry that forward for up to 2 years. There is nothing within that that says that just applies to key workers. It's just, it is only in relation to people that are prevented from taking it because of COVID. And in reality, the numbers of people that will affect is quite significantly small. There will still be some key workers that can take it during that time. I mean, one of the things that we talked about this as a team actually over our WhatsApp group the other day, and what we were saying is actually in our organisation, for example, we think that only our chief exec and a couple of the key partners who have been involved in this, they would be the only people that would be able to carry forward the annual leave. Everyone else is able to take that, and even if they're furloughed, there's been quite a bit of guidance in respect of annual leave during furlough finally that confirms that people can take annual leave and can be required to take annual leave during a period of furlough, but you have to top up the 20% over and above that. So and you can give notice, which is double the amount of leave. You can require employees to take that notice. So what a lot of organisations are doing is, whilst employees are furloughed, are saying, right, next week we're going to pay you 100%. We'll give you 5 days notice of requiring you to take that annual leave. Are there any other questions that we've missed? I think there's just one more I can see. Oh, is there a minimum period or number to consult with employees to change terms and conditions? So what's the minimum period for consulting for a change to terms and conditions? So if you're changing employment terms, it depends on how key the term is. If it's something like a place of work and it's within a reasonable period, or you're just changing the place of work to include working from home, then the consultation requirements is what's reasonable in those circumstances. So it can be a few days if it's something minor like that. If you are reducing the number of hours that an employee is working, so you're going down, say, to a 4-day week or something like that, if the aim is to try and reach agreements. If you reach agreement, there's no minimum period. You know, you can send out a communication. If somebody comes back and agrees to it, then you can start that straight away. If employees refuse, then you'll have to go through the consultation period. And if you're unable to reach agreement, then technically you can forcibly bring about the change by terminating their employment and re-engaging them on the new terms. And whilst it's technically a dismissal, they'll still retain their continuous service. However, if you are terminating their employment, they will count towards your 20 and a 90-day period. So I mentioned before about the minimum consultation periods. So if you're looking at potentially terminating and re-engaging, or redundancies as well, of more than 20, then the minimum consultation periods may kick in those circumstances. Are there any more?
Okay, there's just one last one. We've just got about enough time to squeeze it, and as whilst I'm answering this, I'll get Amy to pop on the slide behind about some upcoming events. One of the last question is will there be a requirement to provide equipment to employees working from home, laptops, papers, printers, etc.? Now, there's not going to be a legal requirement to provide those things. However, it's more a practical thing. The government is likely to encourage all employers to think long and hard about whether employees can work from home, and to therefore provide them with the materials that they will need to continue working from home. So it's more a practical thing. Do you want your employees to be working from home? And if you do they have sufficient equipment themselves to be able to do that, and to do that safely? Amy's already mentioned the fact that We've got a number of people who will be working from home but using their own devices. Are they secure? Do they comply with data protection, etc.? Or do you need to now step in and actually provide them with a laptop? Do they need to be printing things off? Do they need paper? Certainly in Forbes, we're on the whole a paperless office, so we haven't felt the need to provide people with paper or printers. We've asked people to take notebooks home so that they can make the odd note if they need to, but also we've issued quite clear guidance on how handwritten notes are shredded at the end or got rid of safely, because of course we don't want clients' details and sensitive information just going in the kitchen bin. So hopefully that answers that question for you. Now, as you can just see on the screen, we've got a number of events that are coming up over the next few weeks. We've got another live Q&A session this Thursday with Jonathan Holden, our National Head of Employment. It was very popular last week, so please make use of that session. Amy's going to be doing disciplinary online training, which is part of our training programme that we have at Forbes for clients, and for non-clients, anyone can pay to come on that training. I'm going to be conducting a webinar with the East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce on the 20th of May. Hopefully we'll have a bit more guidance on how furlough is coming to an end and how we are releasing lockdown by then to talk about that. Amy's mentioned the redundancy and restructuring training that we weren't originally including in our training programme, but we're bringing that in because we think that it is very important that clients and other businesses who are now thinking about the need for restructures and redundancies are up to date on what you need to be doing to be legally compliant. And finally, two of the solicitors, Trishna and Abby, are going to be holding an agile working webinar in June, on the expectation that a lot of businesses are going to be including that in their plans going forward. So just on the last screen, we have got, if Amy can just pop to the last slide, we've got both our contact details there. So if you've got any questions arising from today, or you think of something later, then please bob us an email and we will come back to you as soon as possible. So thank you very much for joining us. Stay safe and we look forward to seeing you all really soon. Thank you.